Hello, my friends. You are listening to KALX Berkeley. It's your DJ Massari here, and I am with a legend, a songwriter, a producer, an author, and so forth and on, a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member, Lol Tolhurst. How are you doing, sir?
I'm all right this morning. Thank you, Massari.
Nice, nice. Yeah, it's an honor to speak with you again. It was a pleasure to speak with you and Budgie a few years ago. It was a great show with Mickey Bereni Trio at Great American Music Hall.
Thank you. Yeah. I remember that quite well. We enjoyed it. Yeah.
But we are here to talk about tonight. You are doing an event called Folkia Presents, an evening of music and conversation with Lol Tolhurst with very special guests, our Image.
Yeah.
Can you set the scene? Why should we go? What is this? Is there a moderator? Is this just free-form convos? What's the deal?
No moderator, but I think we'll probably do some kind of Q&A at some point. You know, I have to be honest with you. My son lives up here in his band. He has a band, but he also has another project called Our Image, and that's the band that's opening for us. So he's doing double duty because he'll go on and play his songs. I went to their rehearsal last night. It was very good. They'll be playing first, and then I come out and I'm going to talk to the audience because what I'm doing really as well is kind of workshopping my next book.
Okay, yeah.
Nobody's heard anything. This is like exclusive. This is like the first bit, and it's quite a departure from my previous two. And then we'll end the evening by playing some old songs because, you know, they're my old songs as well. So we played them. And but we're also doing some new kind of old material because we're going to record while we're up here and try and, you know, push that sort of thing a little further. So San Francisco is very, you know, it's a hotbed of creativity, as I'm sure you realize, but, you know, it's proved good for us too. So.
I love it. Yeah. So your son, Gray, his other band was Topographies. Yeah. This is still going?
Topographies is still going. Our Image is a kind of totally different kettle of fish. And
more like trip-hoppy, or for lack of a better term, more beats-oriented?
I have to be very careful because if I say trip-hop and that, he'll tell me
Dad!
Off. Yeah, exactly. So... So, you know, I'm going to go. It is what it is, but you'll enjoy it. But, you know, it's they've got a live drummer, which I always, you know, come along early and see. I think people will enjoy it. You know, a lot of it's different, but I think, you know, people will understand.
Nice. Without giving away too many spoilers, and I guess, is Gray also going to be involved with researching on this upcoming book? Can you say?
I hope so, because I can't do all the work myself.
Yeah.
You know? No, and I mean, you know, he's kind of has qualifications that way. Yeah, I mean, you know, this new book, and it's I'm not going to reveal the title until Thursday, but it's I can tell you it's a self-help book.
Okay.
Which, you know, people find a bit strange when I tell them what kind of self-help book it is, but it's just something that occurred to me after, you know, writing the first two books and thinking about stuff and thinking, well, you know, how if I had to, you know, maybe it's something that happens as you get older, but, you know, you try to condense your information and think, well, what did I actually learn? What helped me? And is it something that I can explain to other people and they may be able to use? Or maybe I've seen examples of it because, you know, I've been doing this for 50 years almost, right? And so I see a lot of people, and the good thing about with The Cure and everything that's come since then is that this music is kind of eternal, goes on and on and on, and people... You know, I see people that I've known for 40 years that have come to different things, and I've seen their lives evolve, you know, and it occurred to me that it would be an interesting thing to try and codify a little bit, you know, so I've tried to do that. And actually it's turned out, you know, people always say when you do records, oh, album number 2 is the hardest. Well, with books, Yeah, number three is the hardest because number one, you kind of throw everything but the kitchen sink in, and then you regret it at leisure because you realize, oh,
Yeah.
I put what am I going to write about next? But you manage to get an idea for number two, right? Number three, trust me, it's the desert of your capacity is out there, and so it took me a long while, and I have a new agent, very patient man, and he's been calling me like, what have we got so far? And I'm like, well, I'm going to do a revision of this and that. Okay, get back to me when you've done it. And but we're getting there, and I anticipate there will be some people from the publishers at the show. I think I anticipate it will be finished by the end of this year, and it'll probably be out early next.
Okay.
So that's that's a reasonable timeline, but no more than about a year at the most. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm doing. But that's the thing. And so part of that will be a Q&A. So there will be some audience interaction. I've done things where I've done a lot of like arts festivals as opposed to music festivals these last few years. And there's one particular one that I love doing, the Hay Festival. It started in England, but it's gone all around the world. It's like, I've done ones in Mexico, I've done them in Peru. They go all over the place. And I've done some of those with moderators. And that can be good, that can help. But this time I'll probably let the audience be the moderator, and shout. But you have to shout things at me because
yes,
after all these years, hearing is not as good as it used to be. So
yeah. Well, hopefully the chapel team have a mic.
They'll amp it all up. They'll amp it all up. Yeah.
That's always a little rough because I also go to the cinema a lot and go to a lot of film festivals, and sometimes audience Q&As can be a little tough. So you have to really keep them in check.
Yeah, the trick is there's two things. Number one, better give somebody with a roving microphone out there in the audience. Otherwise, you're not going to hear what they're saying on stage, and that can be painful. And then number two, some people don't actually want to ask a question. Some people want to
comment
what they're thinking about things, which is fine, but it's not a question.
Yeah.
And, so I'm okay with that. I won't tell people, no, shut up, sit down. I'll be friendly and stuff. But questions, please.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of excited, and it makes sense that it's going to be for quote unquote self-help type term book, because there's some shades of that in Goth. The Goth music, as you say, it's more internal rather than external. It's the AC/DC lyrical content versus the Nico content. It's looking within, right? And becoming a Goth is kind of like, here I am commenting, right?
That's good. That's good. You're allowed to. This is the purpose of this,
Is that, the intention of you being a fan to becoming a musician and then respecting that subculture and your experience with that. I mean, and that's, for those that haven't read Goth, it is not a history of Goth, but it's your history of Goth, and it's a very fun read. Comment. I love the parts about the Cocteau Twins, and there was something a little interesting because like everyone has a different story about how they became a baby bat, a baby Goth, but your pipeline is kind of like talking about the post-war England.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you can elaborate on that between you and the Crowley boys, and there's a correlation between the Depeche Mode Basildon boys. What is this post-war situation that you talk about in the book?
Well, it's so funny. I was smiling when you said about Depeche Mode, because they come from a town which is like sort of equidistant from London to the north of London, and which we come from the south, and they are absolutely identical, these towns, because they were both made after the Second World War. A lot of London was bombed out in the Second World War. So what they did was all the people that were displaced. There's an area around London called the Green Belt. I don't know if it's still called that. And it was just like before you get to like farmland and stuff, it's like arable nice land. And of course, that was a great place to build houses, right? So they built I can't remember exactly how many. It's like maybe 8 or something like that. Somebody will probably go, no, it was 5, but no, that's fine. But they built these things called new towns in sort of like the early 50s around England, especially around London, rather. And I think Milton Keynes might be one, but Basildon's definitely one, and Crawley's definitely one. So people that were bombed out in London, that's where they moved to. And these places were sort of, I don't know, the planning of them was not thought about in such a great way, because most of them, they don't really have a centre for the town. Like, most old English towns have a centre that involves the two things that English people seem to care about: the pub and a church, maybe, or something like that, right? And so they became the centre of the town. Well, most of the new towns like Crawley and Basildon, they don't have a centre. They have, like, blocks of houses, and then a little gap, and maybe some fields or something, and then small blocks of houses, and they're sort of decentralised, which causes a lot of problems. So, because people don't have a community identity. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate mail from this. Well, just like
it's your experience, yeah.
Yeah, it's my experience. The local newspaper in Crawley once ran a headline said, "He hates us, but we still love him," about me. But it's I don't hate them. But, I love the place and stuff. But my brother still lives there. But they weren't really good examples of urban planning. They were a way to provide people with somewhere to live and somewhere to work.
It had to be done fast and had to be efficient.
Had to be done fast, yeah. And so they're sort of. It doesn't surprise me that Depeche Mode came from Basildon at all, because it's like, the complete sort of, it's like the shadow of the town we came from, and vice versa. So I think that, growing up in England, sort of in the 60s and 70s and that, we were looking around things, and, we saw a lot of things going on in America. A lot of my first musical things I have, like Hendrix and stuff, it was all from America. A lot of our TV as well, strangely enough, was probably about 60-70% American, right? So I'd see all these things. One of the first things I ever remember, I first came to the States I was 21, and one of the first things, we went to New York. The first things I did with Robert was we went out to the store and bought some things that we had seen advertised in the back of Marvel Comics, because we had no idea what they were.
Yeah.
We were like, Grit, what's Grit? Well, Grit is this newspaper that kids were, got paid to put around or something. And then Twinkies. We went out, we'd never seen, we bought Twinkies. We bought some Twinkies, we took them back. So we sat there and we ate one, and we said, okay, fine, and then a few years ago, I was talking to Robert about that, and he said, yeah, you know what, I still have one in my kitchen drawer. I'm sure it hasn't decayed or anything in 40 years.
It lasts forever.
So, for us, it was exploration. But the thing about, going back to your point about Goth and that, it has light and dark in it. That's the difference. And that's the difference for me. Thinking about a self-help thing is it's not something that's like, oh, everything is wonderful and let's just make it more wonderful, or everything is absolutely terrible. Yeah. Just let's build something completely different. It's like the thing about most Goth music, most Goth persons, is they're like, they see the balance of the good and the bad, and the light and the dark, and the yin and yang. So that's really my premise about, okay, to get something that works for you as a life, and that you have to balance those two things, because they're not all wrong and not all right. And that might sound a bit wishy-washy, but it's not in the book, trust me.
Yeah.
But and basically, I'm just trying to start another cult, is what it is. I figured, well, that's the only place you go after this. No, I'm not really going to do that.
Yeah.
But
But it is important to help people. I mean, you have a subculture. You're celebrating the people within and without it and surrounding. The idea, it sounds also kind of trite, but like planting seeds for trees that you'll never see the shade of.
Very good. I like that line.
Yeah, and it's also like, you touch on that a little bit when you talk about Depeche Mode. There's a moment where you're having struggles, mental health struggles, and you're talking about the conflict with that English stiff upper lip deal.
Right.
And your meeting and your friendship, Andy Fletcher, during this kind of like trying to fix yourself, make yourself better.
Well, you just brought out something else that I was thinking about. I was talking with a good friend of mine the other day who's written a book and is writing another one, and I was telling him, the thing that we both have in common for different reasons is absent fathers, and that was what happened for most guys. Like after the Second World War, my father, he was there every day, but he was not there. I do not remember a conversation I had with him, a substantial conversation about anything really, because he'd come out of the Second World War and he had probably what we would know as PTSD, now.
Yeah.
But much like guys coming back from Vietnam, in England, they just like, well, okay, you're back now, you're home, get on with it, And most of them didn't know how to get on with it. I realized much later in my life that my father had seen some horrific things in his early 20s, which has got to mess you up no matter what,
Yeah.
I know a couple of friends who have relatives who, their sons were in recent conflicts and that, and the same thing happened to them. Although they have more treatment nowadays for it, it's still the stuff. So I started to think about that, and I started to think, well, a lot of what happened for us as guys, in England was really about, okay, that lack of acknowledgement of emotional change that was going on with us, because we had a generation that didn't want to talk about it anyway, didn't want to acknowledge it at all. And that was who we grew up with, and so music and the exploration of different ways of being and life and thinking, without sounding too pompous, that was what was going to set us free,
Yes.
That's the way I look at it.
The punk, maybe the primal scream therapy, rather than.
Well, you're absolutely right. Punk was like the sort of the nihilistic, kick down the doors thing, and like we don't care about anything, and let's just wipe the slate clean. And then goth and post punk came along afterwards, like well, yeah, but there's some good things here that we need to save, so let's pull them out. Because it's like I tell people, most people sort of, just for maybe 1 or 2 years in the early punk things, they would never admit that they had listened to psychedelic music or Pink Floyd or anything like that. They would, of course we all did.
Yeah.
But we just suddenly like, no, it's year one, we have to start again and throw all of that away, which was actually good. It's funny, I did an article for Prog Magazine. I know the guy who writes Prog Magazine a while back, and he knew that I knew out here. He knew that I knew Keith Emerson from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. We were sort of like neighbours, and so we got on about things because we could talk about things. And I remember I went to see them when I was like 14 or something. It was absurd, but it was great. And so we had this sort of connection. And he said, "Oh, good." He said, "So it was his." He's been dead now 10 years. So he said, "I want to write an article, about all of that." And so I did an interview for him, and then he said, "And I've got somebody else that's was close to him at the end, and has known him for years, and another neighbour of yours." I went, "Oh, who's that?" It was John Lydon, right? And John said something very, very good, a bit sort of, very self-aware. He said, to be, prejudice. I had all this prejudice against it. He said, prejudice is a terrible thing, because actually when I met him and, I lived near him and stuff and got to know him, I saw a different person completely, and I think that's the thing. It's a cliche, but it comes with age, at first, you have to throw everything out, but then you have to go back and gather some of the stuff that actually worked. And utilize that,
Yeah, well, too bad with that guy. There's a Ouroboros of prejudice in his worldview.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's like he's perhaps not the best example of it all, but
But a good example would be another gentleman that you talk about quite a bit in the book, is Joe Strummer, who imparted a lot of ideals and confidence in you, and kind of like, which is a beautiful. Is there anything you can elaborate on that?
yeah. Well, it's funny because a couple of months ago, like I do this thing, and this is not, I am not a saint, but I work for a charity, for a friend of mine, which we work to provide musical instruments for people who don't have the money to get them around the world. So we do that, and we do a show each year. And I've had lots of different strange pickup bands that are put together for that. The year before last, I played with Moby, and I'd never even met him. And we walk on stage, and he's like, "Can you play this song?" I go, right. So, and then I just did one this last year with David J, who I know from Bauhaus, and Robin Hitchcock.
Oh, great.
I knew of, but I'd never met either. So, we did all these old psychedelic songs. So that was kind of fun. But one of the people that's regularly involved in this charity is Shepard Fairey, the painter.
Okay, yeah.
And so I heard from Shepard a couple of months ago, and he wanted to put me in contact with somebody I know, and it's information and stuff, because he's going to do a painting, wants to do a painting of them. He suddenly, I told him all the stuff, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll see you next time at wherever. And he had a new exhibition. I said, I'll come along to that. And then out of nowhere, I suddenly got this deluge of prints and paintings and stuff. He just sent me all this stuff, a whole load of Strummer stuff. So now I have this huge Joe Strummer print in my hallway that I've had framed, and it has the quote on it. So it's like, for me, the future is unwritten, right? So that was one thing that I always thought when I heard about Joe. And I had, very early on in the Cure's career, we went on tour with another band called The Passions, and Clive Timperley, who played in The Passions, was in the 101ers with Joe. So he told me a lot about all that stuff. He also taught me how to play backgammon. So, that was kind of interesting. We had these long train journeys through Eastern Germany with nothing to do at all, so we learned how to play backgammon. I like all that connection of it, because I moved out of Crawley and I moved into central London, which is only 25 miles, but it's actually, it's this huge chasm in a young person's life. And so I moved out of there into central London. One of the first people I met was Clive. So, it seems to me it's like a rite of passage, which perhaps is lost a little bit with the social networks now and stuff, because you had to actually physically go to places and do things. You couldn't sit at home and couldn't do what we're doing,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they all have their benefits. I will say this younger generation is trying to go to the movie theater, is trying to go to shows. Yeah. They are trying to do scenes. The people that write articles that say that these things are dead are, that they're just trying to create content.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, the reality is, I've seen it with my son, one of the first things that he discovered was like the joy of going to see a concert or something, see something where people that you identify with, that are doing something, because, the visceral experience is much better than seeing a film, much better than doing it. Films are great for different things, but actually seeing somebody play things and hearing it and experiencing that atmosphere is the thing that's important. And it saved my life for sure. Like I said in the book, Joe Strummer saved my life. Without that, I wouldn't have broken out of the mold at all,
Yeah. And again, that's beautiful that it imparted those ideals in you, and Robert, when these latest Cure tickets, trying to keep them at a reasonable price and fighting against Ticketmaster, is standing on business in honor of the fans and for normal people.
Yeah, and he's always been like that. It's always been part of him. It's like, okay, I get the ability to do this. I get the platform to do this. So why wouldn't I make it like I believe in?
For sure.
I believe in that. I know that. That's great.
So we just need more of those people.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a little bit more.
Exactly. Well, that's you just reminded me. The Shepherd, like he signed off his email or letter to me or whatever. Like it says, and keep being radical. Thank you for being radical. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I can take that one. Thank you.
Another thing I wanted to ask that was mentioned quite a bit in the book, and if it was a drinking game, I'd probably be wasted, was these flipping skinheads ruining everything all the time. What was the deal with these guys? There's riots, ruining shows. They just seem like just a pain in the ass all the time.
Yeah. I think, what is it? It's like the dark matter of the universe. There has to be this. To be honest, I'm saying that in the new book, but there has to be that, counterweight force in it, even if it's destructive. I mean, we're living through times that are very much like that as well. So, I don't know. It seems to be part of the human experience. I have this feeling, you have a young child, right? So they discover things that they're very without guile, without anything for, at least until they're about 2, and then they'll be able to run faster than you, and it'll be, lots of things will happen. But it seems like, maybe in the animal world is the only place where it's like actually okay. Like dogs, I have a dog. I've always had a dog, and dogs, they have beefs with each other, right? Of course, but it's only until you're out of their place. They don't actively come hunting you where you are. It's like you walk in front of the territory. Eddie Izzard, the comedian, does a very funny sketch about what dogs are actually saying and how they're saying it, and if you translated it into English, what they would be saying. And I'd recommend it to anybody. And he's got a point. They get, I'm not going to do anything to you, but you need to move on and get out of the way, because that's what I have to do. I have to protect this part, this area. And human beings are not like that. Human beings go, okay, well, who can we find to mess with now? It's getting too peaceful. It's too calm, so. Yeah.
It's like a misguided energy. It's the skinheads are just as powerless as, say, a goth or a punk or whatever. Yeah. It's just they can't do it against the system, I suppose. So it's easier to do it around the people that are around you. Yeah. And it's one thing, it's like the fine line of trying to not be a pushover, but not fight them too much, because the thing about evil is they learn.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's been like that for a long time, because I have 2 brothers. One still lives in Crawley, and the other one moved to Australia, the other side of the world, years ago. And he said, this is back when I wrote the first book, and he said he'd come to England. I was over here for something. He'd come to England to see our other brother, and on the way out back to go into Australia, I told him I was writing a book, but he didn't know when it was out, and he walked through the airport, and he went to the bookstore. I thought, well, I'll get a book to read. It's a 24-hour plane flight back to Australia, and he walked in and he saw a friend of his who'd written a book, and then he saw my book. And he thought, well, I better get my brother's book, and read it. So he read it, and on the plane journey back, and he said, you know what? It's exactly the same reason I left was the skinheads. He said, he said it was the same thing for me. I decided I'd go somewhere else different. And so, I'm sure there are good skinheads, but what we're talking about is not necessarily the fashion of it. We're just talking about the mindset, right? So
yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I don't know, not to give them too much grace, but it is like a misguided energy. So I guess that's the nicest thing I could say about people.
Well, a lot of it goes with what I'm saying about the thing about, coming home after the Second World War. It's like why gangs appear, there are no father figures. They're all lost somewhere, and so absent fathers is really, that's what forms gangs. And either you go into a good gang, which was kind of like the Cure. The Cure was a good gang, but we felt that. Or you go into a gang that is not good. Yeah.
Try not to hurt people. Well, it's okay to be creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be creative and also be passionate. But, yeah.
Before we go, I also appreciated some of the other bands that you talked about that maybe
Yeah.
don't get enough celebration. Two of them that I found, one that I really appreciated, although I would love to hear more, was the sound when talking about the Doors. But the two bands I wanted to know about are And Also the Trees and All About the Eve. Why did you feel a sense of camaraderie with And Also the Trees?
Well, like the second or third, I can't remember whether it was the second or third album, we decided we're going to do this tour of England. And we wanted to have different bands open for us at different places. So back then, the only way you couldn't say, oh, send me a file and I have a listen or point me to
Yeah.
Spotify or whatever. So we went, okay, send us cassettes. And the Trees sent us these cassettes. And to us, I can remember we were sitting on the bus listening to it and we were going like, yeah, that could have been us if we were out there in the middle of the forest like they were, like living as elves in the middle of this forest, in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
and this is how we would have turned out. And so it was intriguing to us. And so we took them on tour with us and they wanted somebody to work with them to do their album. So I said, yeah, sure. So I got to produce my first album, so it was actually the blind leading the blind because I had a sort of, I was like I was one step ahead in the manual. I'd sort of like when you get a new TV and you ask your friend who's bought one 2 months ago. I kind of knew a little bit, but not a tremendous amount. But we had fun doing it, and we actually recorded it at the old Anarchist studios of Crass.
Oh, wow, nice.
It was the Crass house we recorded it in. So I don't think we ever sold them, but it was kind of fun. And we just kept up a relationship ever since. Fast forward, I've kept in touch with, there's two brothers, right? I kept in touch with Joe over the years, the guitarist, for years and years and years. And then last year, I played some shows in Europe with Mickey Bereni, and I played actually just what we're going to play on Thursday was I played with my son and I borrowed Mickey's bass player, Oliver. Mm-hmm. We did sort of early Cure stuff as a trio, and I saw this band that was opening for us, and I thought that looks familiar, that name, and then. In the sound check, in walked Simon Jones, who's the singer of Also the Trees, who I haven't seen in 40 years. 40 years. And he looked exactly the same. Exactly the same. He walked over to me and he said, it's been 40 years. I went, wow. So that was great. But they're great. They've just kept on going on. They've had a modicum of success in places like France and stuff, so that's kept them going. I don't know. They had something that I really didn't see in anybody else. So I think, and I know Robert's going to put them on some of the shows that they're doing later this year. So
that's fantastic.
It's all good. We keep our word. To each other whenever we can. And like I say, I'm friends with Joe still to this day. So
yeah. And then why did you feel it was important to mention All About Eve, which I was very unfamiliar with, and I've been listening.
The other thing is, it's like the Cure's manager Chris Parry had all these pithy little one-liners. One of his favorite ones was "It's a people business." I was doing a book tour for the first book. And somebody told me, oh, Julianne is like, she's lecturing on, music and stuff in Bath at the university, right? And I'm sure she'd like to do something with it. And I went, oh, okay. So we sort of reacquainted ourselves because I sort of vaguely knew her back in the day. And we found we had really a lot in common. And then I started listening to the stuff more and I realized, okay, this is like another version of it, but it's got a little different twist. And she has, a very unique experience, as like she said, like in the book, from growing up in Ireland and then moving over. And I know where she grew up, and it's it's a great place, but it's detached from a lot of stuff. And she moved to London, and she was in London about the same time as I was. And it must have been very difficult because, she looked rather different than a lot of the people that were walking around. And, like she said she probably scared this old lady at the bus.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then when they got talking, she realized, oh, you're actually, you're not the devil come to do something to me. So, it's different. And that to me is a very, very human thing. And I remember being in London at that point, how it was, so, you had to go, you couldn't really get on the bus a lot of times. You had to go everywhere by taxi because you might encounter one of the aforesaid skinheads. So, yeah.
It was refreshing to kind of like hear her voice, the female voice within this, and actually had so much to say as opposed to some of the other artists that you talked about. There was a few like PhD authors that you spoke to, kind of like about more art and literature, but it was really nice to hear the female perspective of a female goth.
Exactly, and that's who she is, and we're still in regular contact, and she's she's somebody I think who has a very strong not opinion. She helped a lot of that happen, and people don't realize how pivotal a lot of what she did was. So
yeah, and maybe some of that that wonderful Irish gift of gab that is approachable rather than
yeah. So she was living in the same part of town as I was in London, which is really really, I guess, for want of a better word, is like the Irish part of London, Shane McGowan lived down the road from me and stuff. So it was quite an experience living there, because it's a bit of both things, like the capital city, but you could also be in, darkest Dublin somewhere.
But yeah, Lol, thanks for chatting with me. I'm so excited. I'll be there Thursday. Okay. I won't ask any questions because I've been blessed with talking to you two times now. So have a lovely day, and I hope you have a great show. And I'm really excited for this book. Thank you for sharing your time with me.
Thank you so much, Massari.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.